Hello teachers, welcome to Para Maestros podcast. This is the English version. Para Maestros means for teachers only. Here we will talk about education, everything related with our profession, from the perspective of Latin America and from the perspective of other teachers from around the world. We will have opinions, interviews, and lots of information about education, and I hope you enjoy it. Every morning, a teacher in Gaza will write on the board, "Today we're safe." But she never knew that was true.
In the mountains of Colombia, teachers held class in hidden locations, moving daily to avoid armed groups. The children would jump every sound, but when they opened books, for a moment, they were somewhere else.
These are the voices of teachers who have faced the unimaginable, educating children while bombs fall and bullets fly. Today on Para Maestros, we share their stories, their courage, their resilience, and hope from two conflict zones worlds apart.
Stories that remind us that when they talk about frontline workers during conflict, we often forget those maintaining the thin line between chaos and normalcy for our children, teachers.
I'm Carolina.
I am Juan.
And this is Para Maestros. Stay with us to hear how Colombian teachers transform and try to keep safe an entire generation of rural students, and how Palestinian educators turn rubble into a place of learning. For over 6 decades, Colombian conflict between the government, the guerrilla groups and paramilitaries and drug cartels turned the rural areas into a bullet ground. In these contested zones, schools became targets. Teachers were threatened by all sides, accused of indoctrinating children or collaborating with the enemies. In rural areas of Colombia, education transformed during the conflict.
During the 80s and 90s, the fighting near villages intensified, and many schools' buildings were occupied by armed men. Students and teachers were told to leave or face the consequences. But some teachers stay and face the dangers of the conflict. They resist to keep schools and spaces of peace and neutrality. For instance, one of the stories that touched my heart was in Ituango, a municipality in Antioquia, where the principal of the rural school had to kick out an armed groups that had occupied the school premises.
I remember that story, and it's a story of courage that I can't forget. At the beginning, I remember they said the leader of the group refused to leave and threatened the principal, but she didn't back out. Instead, she insisted that children have to come to study next morning. Therefore, that group had to leave. That moment, this principal showed that they have to choose knowledge over and the well-being of the students over the conflict. And many educators in Colombia often face threats from armed groups. A school can become targets in areas of conflict. Despite the risk, many teachers remain committed to their mission, viewing education as a powerful tool for social transformation. Many Colombian educators have taken on the dual role of teaching and fostering peace in conflict-affected areas. For instance, teachers in rural regions have developed community-based educational initiatives to promote dialogue, reconciliation, and critical thinking. This effort aims to counteract the cycles of violence that students have been faced for decades and decades. So they want to foster a world where peace is the future.
But in 2016, the Colombian government and the guerrilla FARC signed the peace agreement, which is being implemented in the country. One of the implementation was the Commission of Truth, which was looking for causes behind the conflict and recognize the victims. This is very important, including the teachers that face the horrors of war. All of this is now a document available for everyone who wants to read it.
Yeah, anybody can read this document. I felt when I I watched the release of the document, and
Mhm.
as our audience know, we are Colombians. We were living during the transition, well, when the conflict, all the time during the conflict, and also when the peace agreement was signed, and now with it, we're transitioning, still transitioning into a better society. But I remember that sometimes we were scared, sometimes we were not sure what was happening, but I was lucky I live in the city, so I didn't face the conflict as those teachers in this rural area. But I remember one thing that happened was long ago, that at school I was working out, that was around the city. It
Mhm.
was not in the city, but out of the city. They invited people from the conflict, like paramilitaries and guerrilla, to talk to the students. And it was the 11th grade students, and tell them the stories that they have to, why do they do what they do, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought I was a little scared. I was a kindergarten teacher, so I wasn't there to check and see those people. But the brave of that teacher that invited these people from
Mhm.
two different sizes of the conflict, and not having this fight between them, and having their students ask him questions. And when the teacher told us she has this opportunity to tell us, and she said, students ask, why did you do that? How do you feel when you do that? Do you have remorse or things like that? The students were asking that, and we were like, that's amazing, because that's critical thinking, and that definitely is going to stay with the students forever. So I remember the bravery of that teacher, and it's just amazing how they did it, and how they could negotiate these people coming and having to tell the stories, and then living in peace, like nothing happened. But students really have this opportunity, and I thought that was interesting, very amazing.
And I think this is a different way to approach to the conflict or to
Mm-hmm,
in the case of Colombia, we lived in the city, and it's a different experience of the war
mm-hmm,
from those who live in the rural areas. So this initiative or this experience that you already comment is very interesting because students can have another side
mm-hmm,
of the war
mm-hmm,
and can contribute to a critical thinking and another knowledge and build another knowledge of the conflict and in this case of the war. This is
mm-hmm.
very important and I think is we have to congratulate the teachers who let that
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
these these people come to the school.
Yeah, and it was a project. They were doing an interesting project about war and conflict. And what do you talk about a war, second, World War II, when we have a conflict right there in our
Mhm.
own home? So I thought that was very brave from her. And of course the school also had to give permissions and all of these things. But yeah, things that like that make me think that teachers are the ones keeping this, trying to keep peace and trying to understand why do we do what we do, and why do we have such a long conflict here. So I think that is a very, very, very interesting. But there is not the world is full of
Mhm.
conflicts, and teachers are facing things every single day in different parts of the world. Some people, as me, I think I consider myself lucky, I didn't have to face several things, but some people had to, some teachers had to. And we're going to dive in one of the other conflicts, which is Gaza. We're diving into the situation of Gaza and the state of the teachers, and it's devastating, as we know, that what's happening there is sad and is devastating, and a lot of children are suffering and are being killed, and lots of teachers also. So we wanted to touch this because it's another conflict, different from our conflict. I think I own the conflict. It's my conflict, but it's different. But there are teachers there, and they are facing this situation. So we came across a powerful article from the site dev.net featuring these insights from an educator in the ground field. And there is also the report of the University of Cambridge that paints a stark picture of the challenges facing by students and teachers. So we're going to start to tell the story that they, portrayed and say in this article. So this teacher, the teacher Cahill, I think that's the pronunciation, a senior teacher in Gaza, describes the situation nothing short by catastrophic. He emphasized that the scale of destruction and trauma necessitates a complete overhaul of the education system.
And in this report, the UN report mentioned that it states that a year-long war has led to the near total collapse of Gaza's education system. We are talking about destroyed facilities and a tragic loss of human resources, including over 400 teachers lost in the conflict. It's heartbreaking to think about the impact of on the children. This is very difficult, and it's not easy to understand. Cahill points out the immense psychological trauma they have endured, loss of family members, limbs, repeated displacement, and a constant lack of security. The report itself states it is not overstanding to say everyone is traumatized, and the physical damage to school is immense. According to the report, over 90% of schools have been damaged in some. Cahill describes the current reality of using school tents with lack even the most basic necessities for a proper learning environment.
And the teachers keep going and keep going and keep going. It's amazing. I mean, not only teachers but service workers are all there trying to keep it together. That's interesting and brave. I don't know if I could, but they're very brave. He also raises a deeply concerning issue: the impact of this environment on children's behaviors. That that I think we can relate in Colombia to that. Because he mentioned that an increase of violent tendencies, theft among students, is a direct consequence from the trauma and the desperation they have experienced. So it's very similar what happened here, because we have faced this situation with our students when they have suffered so much, or they have to be involved in situations that are so difficult for them, they became violent. And that's when the curriculum had to change. We cannot just teach math as is math. No, we have to change the curriculum. We cannot be all about math or Spanish or how to spell words. It's about human lives and humanity, and recover this humanity from these students. So it's interesting. And also the Professor Pauline Rose from the University of Cambridge, one of the authors of the reports, highlight the unprecedented nature of this conflict impacts in education. She estimated that children in Gaza had already suffered at least 2 years of education lost, potentially extended to 5 years. This article serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequence of the conflict on education and the immense challenge faced by educators and students in Gaza. The comprehensive rebuilding and sustainable international support is undeniable.
And there is a very famous pedagogical thinker, which is Roy Van Feuerstein. He he talked, I think, after the World War II, and he deal with the consequences of trauma in children after the World War II.
Yeah.
This is very, very important because we have never think deeply in the social consequences of the trauma. Not only the trauma who suffered the conflict, but what it did to the rest of the society. For example, the violence into the nuclear family, the violence in the urban areas. This is part of the conflict.
Yeah.
But we have to take more into account, because it's very important to teach in schools what happened after the war and what are their consequences.
Yeah, we will touch on that in the next episode. We're going to talk about the history, how to make history, and who tells the history. That's interesting too. But one
Mhm.
of the things I think is important to remember is that, or it is important to remember that when we live in a conflict, nothing is separated with the conflict.
Mhm.
So we tend to say, oh, there's a lot of violence in a family, but that comes from a conflict too. There's a trauma that we never address because
Mhm.
we don't think we think, oh, the war is end. It's not, because we have to work with the trauma. The adults, we all have traumas in Colombia. I think we are considered victims too. We all have some certain level of trauma because that's what happened to us. We live in long conflict, and forgetting that those things have long lasting consequences, and then that we don't address them, they they become a cycle and a cycle and a cycle. And that's why the commission of truth is so helpful, because they are addressing at least the part of the history that we don't know or we don't understand. And eventually, they're implementing some strategies, pedagogical strategies, with some
Mhm.
schools in rural areas where they have to face the trauma. So the idea is to not go back to that again. And
Mhm.
I honestly believe that only education can do it.
Yes.
And of course, with the touch of mental health, or with mental health together. But we cannot do it. We cannot just finish a conflict and leave it like it is like that. No, it has
Mhm.
to. We have to address the trauma.
Mhm.
So we often forget that in conflict zones, teachers are there. So often when we talk about frontline workers in conflict zones, we refer a lot of people, but teachers rarely make the list.
Mhm.
Media covers the military personnel, the medical staff, the humanitarian workers, but yet teachers seems to be somewhere there. But teachers are also in the front line, and it's important to recognize, and it's important to as we name them in a conflict zone as from workers or from frontline workers, we need to also give them training. They need protection equipment. They need a lot of things, because if we don't mention them, they're not
Mhm.
there, right? So we need to mention that teachers also are frontline and the frontline workers in a conflict zone. So it is important to think about it. According to the Global Coalition Protect Education from Attack, over 12,700 and attacks were occurred on education. 12,700, that's a lot.
Mhm.
Between 2015 and 2019, uh, they were affecting 22,000 students and teachers and educational personnel. So we have lots of teachers suffering from different conflicts around the world. And it's important to name them, to tell them that we see them, that we know they're
Mhm.
there.
And for instance, in the case of Colombia, more than 1,000 teachers were killed during the 5 decades of conflict. Thousands more were threatened or displaced. Palestinian educators face similar risk. Schools have been repeatedly targeted or caught in crossfire with hundreds damaged or destroyed in Gaza alone. And when peace agreements are negotiated, education is often a thing.
Yeah, when they did the peace agreement in Colombia, I think education seems to somewhere there, but it's getting better. I think that's my belief. Maybe not.
Mhm.
Um, Both in 2016, the peace agreement and various proposed Middle East peace plans have contained limited provisions for educational recovery or support for teachers who maintain learning during the worst times of violence. This overlook is crucial. We need to help teachers. We need to um, recognize their work, so we have a sustainable peace. As I said before, education, mental health are crucial to maintain peace.
Mhm. So this episode, Katrina, leaves us with a profound appreciation of the vital role of educators, particularly in conflict affected regions, and a call to action to support their invaluable work. Their struggle is a reminder that education is not just about textbooks or classroom, it's about nurturing hope, resilience, and the future. And looking ahead to our next episode.
Yeah, when we were exploring the fascinating and subtle ways to how teachers foster independent thought in challenging environments. Join us for the silent resistance, the powerful of critical thinking. We delve into how teachers promote independent thought under the restrictive regimes, and we won't want you to miss it. Thank you for listening to us. We hope this episode touched your heart and promote this support for the teachers that are suffering around the world. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening, teachers. Stay curious. Connect with me on social media and explore my website. All the links in the description below.